Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to the Black Sanctuary. This is the relaunch of the Empower Hour. I have a special guest with me today, Nate, and he's going to share with you his ventures and some of his ideas. So I don't want to introduce him in a way that doesn't do him justice. So I'm going to let him do that. And then we're going to have a very exciting conversation about race and Christianity. So let's get into it. All right. So, how are you today, Nate?
Good, Melanie. I'm doing great. It's a rainy morning here in Pennsylvania, but it's awesome. I love the rain. So I don't know if it's sunny where you are, but
No, it's raining as well. So we must not be too far away.
yeah. Well, live up near Philly, and I am an evangelist outreach developer for an organization called Crew, and then I also serve as an Army National Guard chaplain as well. So, married, got 3 kids. So that's a very brief introduction to kind of what I do. I just got done writing a book, which I'm excited about, to kind of help people generate conversations and be authentic around the table. So I'll just leave it at that. But yeah.
All right, sounds good. So today's episode is called A Seat at the Table. And I named it that because of Nate's approach to evangelism. All right, so would you like to tell us what is table talk?
Yeah, well, very simply put, table talk is creating a space around the table somewhere in the community. It doesn't matter if you want to do it at a restaurant, if you want to do it in coffee shops, cigar lounges. I tend to do mine in breweries because there's a lot of people that have conversations. So I get Christians to invite non-Christians to the table, and we have really authentic conversations about all kinds of topics like justice, fear, anxiety. We talk about love. I just did one on stereotypes last month. It was great conversation.
No.
And basically, I allow people to process whatever they want to. They can say whatever they want to as long as they're polite. There's no judgment. And if I'm giving everybody the seat at the table, if a Muslim or if a Buddhist has a seat at the table, that means Jesus naturally has a seat at the table. So it's natural for the existential, for the spiritual to be brought up as a solution to the problem. So that's the basics of it in a nutshell. But I do it once a month, and it's a community building kind of outreach.
Nice. So we met a couple of weeks ago, and basically we had our own kind of table talk, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as we were talking, the issue of race came up. And so I remember you asking me a question about race and it being such a big issue. And you had some questions about how do you address it in a way that aligns with Christianity because it's such a big issue. So we had this whole conversation and it was absolutely amazing. And then the next day you presented at this conference that we were at. And as you presented, I was like, oh my gosh, we actually just did this. We had this whole conversation. And this is my style. I like to engage people in conversation. So I got super excited. I was like, okay, we have to do this all over again. So with that being said, we set this up and I realized that we had an approach to Christianity that's called, or it classifies as theology from the margins. So in what you were saying, you tend to talk to people about different topics in a very conversational style, but everyone gets a seat at the table. And when it comes to race, and we're in a post-colonial society, there are a lot of people who have been placed in a position called the margins. Basically, they've been kind of pushed to the periphery of society. So in this theology of the margins, you tend to go after those people, just like Christ did, right? Christ didn't come to just preach to the people in the church. He went out and he found people who were basically outcast in societies, the majority of the missions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, what's your idea on theology of the margins in that take, or from the description that I gave, or anything that you might know about what you're doing?
Yeah, well, I think what I love about Jesus is that he's always pursuing those that others would never pursue, right? I mean, Israel had, as a nation, didn't have any value. They were a tiny, puny little people group, and as far as like Jesus goes, like, the woman at the well, she was a total, like, out in the margins, right? She's outcast. She's morally broken. She's racially different. She's been making mistakes her entire life in her cultural context, and yet Jesus engages with her in conversation. It kind of depends on, I mean, I was just reading this morning that he says that the children have a place in the kingdom of God, right? And children were considered the outsiders, because who wants an opinion from the kids? Kids weren't valued back then as important, right? So I feel like Jesus is very much always pursuing people who we would probably overlook. I mean, I think he intentionally pursues the margins. And I was well, anyway, this is another. So Matthew chapter 9. I remember when we were at the conference, there was a presenter talking about Jairus and a woman who was bleeding, and she goes to the hem of Jesus's, right, of his robe, and she gets healed. What's really interesting is, I was just reading this the other day, in Matthew chapter 14, he shows up to a town and people were asking to just touch the hem of his robe. Now, I can't make a claim here that this is necessarily related, but I do think it might be related, that she was so contagious with her faith that she didn't care. She was this outcast nobody, and all of a sudden she was sharing Jesus with everybody. Look what he did for me. And I think maybe people were looking to touch the hem of his robe. So I just feel like he pursues the margins. Sorry, I don't know if that.
No, that's great. So, in pursuing the margins, and that story, I like that you brought that up. It also has to do with the voice of people who are usually either put to the periphery, they're invisible, but their voices become amplified. So, something else that Jesus does after this woman is healed, in that conversation or in the presentation that was given, the presenter brought up the fact that Jesus then asked, who touched me? Right.
Yeah.
And so this woman who was societally ostracized and invisible in some ways, and her voice, I'm pretty sure, was not valued or heard, now comes to the forefront, and she's made visible. Her voice is heard, her condition is heard, and then she can go on and she can evangelize, because there's been this transformation, right?
Yeah.
Jesus saw her condition, and not only did he see her and heal her, because he could have healed her and kept her in a secret place, right?
Yeah.
And she could have went on about her business, but he brought her back into society, reintroduced her, right, in a new way with a new story. But she also had an attachment to her old story so that she could tell it. And then you have this wondrous event from her perspective and her narrative, which I think is one of the most powerful things, right? So that segues us into another part of the conversation that we had. We're talking about people on the margins, invisibility, these conversations of people that are being muted. As an African-American woman, there are all types of parallels when it comes to the Christian faith that I've experienced with that, right? So I got saved at a very early age, and I witnessed this particular God that was just amazing, right? I don't know if I was sharing with you or not, but like my encounter with God started when I was a child. I was in a house that caught a fire, And I heard this voice speak to me just as clear as day, like how you and I are talking, telling me not to sleep in a particular room, right? And so I didn't think anything of it. I listened to that voice. I didn't sleep in the room that particular night. I woke up to the woman of the house like yelling and screaming, saying, "Get out of the house. The house is on fire." She was trying to find me, and my brother was with me at the time. And so I found her, and she was telling me, "Get your brother, get out of the house. The house is on fire." And so I did that. And in doing that, I passed by the room that I would normally sleep in, that I heard this voice tell me just as clear as day, don't sleep in that room. Passed by the room was ablaze, right?
Mm.
Um, we weren't going to church at the time. I didn't really know who God was, but a couple of years later, my dad gets into church. I'm listening to this pastor, and he's talking about giving your life to Christ, and I felt compelled to do so.
Mm.
And that same voice that I heard that told me not to sleep in the room was the same voice that I heard bidding me to come to give my life over to be saved, right? And so from a very early age, I had experienced where God's love, one, came and protected me, right? Because um if I wasn't told that night, not to sleep in that room, I probably would not be here today, right? So this love that came and saw about me, this little kid that just didn't know any better. And then later on, when I got some understanding about who this God was, I just was enamored with the way that, wow, this God is so loving to come and just see about me and to come and talk to me, spend time with me. So as an African American female, I had none of those layers that society put on me when I met God, right? I just knew I was a child, and I had this awesome experience, right?
Yeah.
Then I grow up, and as I grow up and I go into places where other Christians that don't necessarily look like me and don't have my experience, I get a very different take on even if I'm a Christian or not, because I got reprimanded. I remember one particular time because of my political affiliation, and then there were some other things, right? And then, I've been told that I come from a line of a descendant that was cursed, right? And so my race and slavery are all mixed in together. So all these different things. And I'm like, the God that I know and the God that I met would be like super cruel if this was the case. So as a Black person, I began to have to wrestle with all these different narratives that were centered around Christianity. And then that was in conflict with my initial experience. And so it has me on this journey where it's like, I know that I know God for myself. But as a Christian, it's like, how does race play into this? So, my next question for you then is, do you see matters of race as an issue of for Christians to resolve? And then why or why not? Is it even something that we should be talking about as Christians?
Oh, 100%. I mean, that we should be having all kinds of conversations, particularly about race, because it's a big part of American history. I mean, and it's a big part of global history as well. I think this has always been around because I think people naturally try to find differences and then isolate each other on those differences, and race is one of the probably the biggest ways that people do it. And so I think it's a very relevant topic. And I even believe in the Bible, you see all kinds of themes and stories that relate to race. And yeah, I think it's something that just will never go away. So it needs to always be talked about. And creating healthy, pathways to do that, I think is essential. Because I think a lot of times, now I'm not saying all the white community is this way at all. I'm not representing everybody, but I do think there's a struggle for at least a lot of whites to engage in this and sit down and listen and just to just understand other people's experiences. So, because it's part of everybody's life, to some degree, I think it needs to be discussed. It just, if you care about something and I don't, and I say I don't care about that, then you'd be like, well, why would you? How are we going to be friends? How can we have an intimate relationship if you literally don't care about some of the deepest parts of my life, right? So I think we need to talk about it. Um, Now, how to have that conversation is another topic, right? That's a whole nother obstacle, and it's actually potentially something I'm looking forward to maybe working on a project to do.
Yeah, so this is one of the reasons why I wanted to have this conversation just with you, because I'm a part of the work that I do. I remember you asked me how I showed you my website, and you asked me, how does this like intertwine into the gospels? Like, how is
Hmm.
there a connection to this in the gospels? And as you said earlier, Jesus basically went to the people on the margins, and
Hmm.
people on the margins today are still dealing with being placed on the margins because of their racial identity, right?
Hmm.
God created us all in these beautiful, diverse bodies. And in doing so, he also showed up to us in different ways and presented himself. But Christianity has kind of gotten taken a hit, because there are people that have similar experiences to what I had, and they say, this Christian stuff, like, it was bought over here by the slave masters, and it's not a religion that belongs to
Yeah.
people who are not European, basically. And that's not true. It's not true at all. But we can't get past this conversation of race sometimes, and I think this is a thorn in the witness of Christianity, right? Because of that.
Yep.
So this leads into my next question about challenges, right? So what do you find challenging when talking about issues concerned with race? And actually, I need to fix that real quick. So
Yeah. No, it's all good.
Mhm.
But I do want to kind of go back a little bit. I think Christians and even non-Christians, I don't think they necessarily understand this completely. But I think it's really important to remember that human rights really comes down to, does every human being have inherent value and worth, dignity, value, and worth? And I believe that being made in the image of God means every human being, period, deserves to be respected, cared for, loved. And that's where human rights comes from. And so I think a lot of Christians forget that somehow, you know, or, people just kind of think, because if there's no God and there's no purpose to life, then, well, morality kind of goes out the window at that point, right? But I think Christians need to lean in this conversation with that mindset, even if it's uncomfortable for them. This is made in, this person's made in God's image. I want to listen to their story. I want to hear what they have to say, and not just simply dismiss them and say, "Oh, well, I don't really agree with your views," or I don't think we're going to get along, and I don't really care what you have to say." So I just think overall, I think Christians need to get back to literally Genesis chapter 1. We're made in His image. I think that's a powerful reality to start from. But anyway, to your question, what do you find challenging when talking about issues concerning race? Are you asking me as an individual?
Yes, I am, because I feel like this is how it starts. So we're sitting at the table, right? A virtual
Hmm.
table, but we're both sitting at the table. We're here,
Yeah.
and I have you and you have me to kind of start this conversation, to bridge this gap. Now, by no means, like you said earlier, are you a complete representation of all white people. And same here. I'm not a
Hmm.
representation of all Black people, but I am a voice that we can start to have conversations and to get
Hmm.
some general understandings of what some of the challenges are. Because oftentimes, you have to get to the general before you can get to the specific.
Yeah.
And sometimes it takes getting to the very specific to get at the general. So that's the
Yeah.
application. But just in your personal experience, what have been some of your
Yeah.
challenges?
I would say the number one challenge is fear,
Okay.
because fear is like, I don't want to look stupid. I don't want to say something ridiculous. And so, uh, by the way, I live in a very white town, right? So talking about race doesn't really happen a whole lot, to be honest with you. Like, I mean, it's getting more diverse as Philadelphia's pushed out a lot of different cultures kind of outside of the city. So now we have a lot of a lot of people commuting into the city. So the good thing is it's becoming less, less white. So, we are seeing some diversity come in. But, as a kid growing up, like, it really wasn't something that was talked about. And so, to engage in conversation with somebody about race, especially if I'm talking to, a black person or something like that, it would be very, I'd be like, oh my gosh, like, what if I say the wrong thing? Or, I know it's a cultural hot topic. I don't want to look like an idiot. Um, and so I think fear of being rejected or looking stupid is definitely one of the biggest barriers to discussing race. Um, that's one. I think another one is kind of, well, why do we need to? Right now, I'm not saying this is my current views.
Hmm.
Okay, this is, my journey coming into it. These are thoughts that I kind of had internally, was like, well, aren't we past it? I mean, like, I didn't do it. I didn't do that. Like, why, I don't want to be looked at as someone who's responsible for this, and not realizing that the conversation is really, really important to have, and to look at this from someone else's perspective. I think which kind of lends itself to, like, a very selfish perspective of, well, if it's not meaningful to me, therefore it's not meaningful to anybody. Or if I don't think is a problem right now, I guess it's not a problem to anybody else, right? And by the way, again, I'm not saying these are my current views, but these are just thoughts that come into your head
Hmm.
sometimes, and you just, you know, man, it's like, I just, it'd be easier just not to get in the conversation, and maybe create waves, or make any kind of rift if there isn't any. If I don't talk about it, maybe there's not going to be a problem, right? Does that make sense? I'll give you that, because that's probably a lot for you to chew on there. You're probably like, "Oh, okay, Um, and by the way, those are all wrong attitudes to have, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
But even get into a space where you can articulate these, there's a lot of different things that have to happen, right? So, one, you have to have the opportunity. And then
hmm
from the opportunity, it sounds like you have to have the courage, to get past whatever fears that
hmm
might come from having hard conversations. And once you get past those fears, there's still a level of vulnerability that you have to have, because you have to take the lens off of yourself, right?
yeah,
And you have to
hmm
then have this understanding that it's not about you, right? If someone's coming and telling you that they're hurting, it's no different than if I come to you and I say, hey, I fell, I
hmm
scraped up the whole side of my face, I'm bleeding, whatever the case may be. And then you're like, well, I'm feeling great. If you have
yeah.
that kind
I
of,
didn't do that. I didn't hurt you.
yeah, I didn't hurt you. I don't have any scrapes or scars on me. So, like, are you sure that you're hurting?
hmm
It's kind of like that same response with some of the things that you were talking about, you felt. And it becomes a hard conversation to have, because it's like there's one party who's like, hey, I want to talk about this. And not because I want to arrest somebody in these acts of horrible deeds, but this stuff is affecting my life. Like you
hmm
talked about earlier, that you live in a very white neighborhood, right?
hmm
These white neighborhoods were built at the expense of people of color. Black
hmm
people often were redlined. So if they wanted to live in certain communities, They weren't allowed. And if they did the work, if they earned the degrees,
Hmm.
if they purchased the home, meaning they put up the same dollars that you put up, right?
Hmm.
And they came into communities, they weren't always welcome. And
Right.
sometimes their welcoming committee showed up in a very hostile way to let them know that, hey, you're not welcome in these types of environments. And so that
Hmm.
creates this whole other experience of I have to live in your world, right? But you don't have to live in mine. And then you don't
Hmm.
have to even take on the realities of mine. So these conversations come to one add insight into that whole notion, right? Because you can go on and live the rest of your life probably and not have to engage with a community of color because
Yeah.
that's how the US is set up. There are pockets of the world that they don't necessarily have to. And then when they do show up, oftentimes it is at the expense of the people of color. So if a neighborhood is regentrified or something, right? Resources that haven't been in a community for a very long time might start popping up in these communities,
Hmm.
but the people who live there are then pushed out, right? Where do those
Yeah.
people go? They have all these, so there are all these experiences that are happening alongside your life, right?
Yeah.
And alongside your reality, but they never get the opportunity to have the conversations for how these lives are intersecting, how they are impacting one another,
Hmm.
because there are these things that prevent us. One, just the uncomfortableness, and then two, there has been a standard that's set that okay,
Hmm.
no, we're not going to talk about this. Like even though
Yeah.
I didn't do it, but somebody that was in my lineage help set some things up this way. I'm benefiting from it, in some
Hmm.
ways, but I don't want to touch it. I don't want to talk about it um, because it's inconvenient to me. And so getting through all of that, it's
Yeah.
not easy, but it's
Well,
worth I feel like exploring. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
well, the way that history is taught, at least from my perspective, it's not from empathy. It's not. Here's information that happened in the past, right? The empathy, the heart of the history, hasn't come forward, right? In the sense of, put yourself in your in this, in this community's position, or this person's position. It was very much, here's the data, information, move on. And so that conditions you to think past. Okay, we're the past is gone. You're talking about like built like, right, the black community building up towns, and we're benefiting. But like, if you don't slow it down, like if my history teacher doesn't slow that down, give me the heart and the empathy in that, then I'm just going to keep going.
Hmm.
So there could be a historical education process too, you know, of how we teach history.
Yeah, I mean, well, there is a historical approach where these conversations are being removed because people still don't want to talk about them, right? And so again, it goes back to the marginalization of particular people.
Yeah.
And as we talk about it, and then we talk about it from a Christian approach, because everything that I do, whether it's anti-racism work or whether it's something that's directly aligned and it says Christianity or Bible or something of that nature, it still comes from the heart of what I know should be done as a person of moral character, right? And my moral
Hmm.
character comes from this mandate that God gives me that says I'm supposed to be a righteous person and that I'm supposed to treat people right.
Hmm.
um, but our hermeneutical interpretations or understanding of the Bible has kind of also messed that up because there's even understanding or notions that people hold that some people are elected and seen by God as valuable, and others are not. That we have, like, we serve this Christian God that goes and he picks, he selects certain people, and other people, you're just not in the club. So sorry, sorry for your luck. And race has very much so gotten intertwined into that belief. And it gets messy. But I think how you said before about having empathy, the ability to listen and to see another person. So again, like that story that you were talking about, the woman with the issue of blood, her humanity was restored in her healing. So she wasn't just healed from a physical standpoint, but she was healed from a societal standpoint as well, because she was brought to the forefront. And
Yeah.
then whatever conversations came around that, I'm pretty sure she had some stories to tell about people and how they treated her because she was an outsider.
Yeah, even the woman at the well, right? She was a half-blood, right? So she was partially Jewish and Samaritan, and so they had this conflict, right, of like this racial tension, right? And the way that she lived her life, her whole home community didn't like her because she's got all these husbands, like she's just making all the wrong choices. And then she has an encounter with Jesus, and immediately she goes back to her town and she shares him all over the place. Um, so her identity was completely transformed by this encounter with Jesus. So you don't care what people thought anymore. Yeah. I'm gonna go back to my home place and I'm gonna share Jesus, and you can think whatever you want, which I know it's called Empower Hour, but I really do believe that having our identity in Jesus gives us that empowerment to move forward and step through and have the hard conversations. That was a hard conversation for her to have with her hometown. And I think if going back to as a Christian, I think to really root my identity in Christ is to pursue people and their stories and have the hard conversations and to go in and listen. And anyway, I don't know what you think about that, but I
It's
think
not, well,
that's
it's
that.
not about what I
I think
think.
that's a starting place.
For sure, definitely, for sure. So, I have another question. I didn't
Yeah,
write this one down, but I just like having a good, open, candid conversation, right?
yeah, yeah.
So, back to the you and I. I'm a Black woman, you're a white guy with a very different upbringing, probably a very different vantage point of how you see the world.
Hmm.
But to have this rupturing in some sense of, okay, I probably have not ever really engaged in conversations like this. And now all of a sudden,
Hmm.
I'm past the fear and I want to do this. What was your place of rupturing where it said, you know what? There's something to be gained with having these types of conversations.
Um, when you say rupturing, what do you mean by that? Like,
Your aha moment or something that kind of broke in maybe the route or the road that you were on before, and how you contextualize these things or how you saw these matters.
well, um, I would say, I guess the problem is I kind of grew up, like I said, in a very white town, right? I mean, when I was a little boy going through a church hall, I remember an older man pulling me to the side, looking at a biracial couple and saying, "They're living in sin. They should not be married because they're biracial." Hey, as a 7-year-old kid, what do I know? You know, um, wasn't until I read my Bible, which I love how Martin Luther says that you guys need to read your Bible. That's what you guys actually need to do to reform this. Um, then
Notes.
I was like, wait a minute. I didn't For years I thought it was like sin, but I didn't find it in the Bible anywhere. And I was like, okay, that was baloney. But like, so I never really like in my household, um, it just never really we never talked about it. So I guess it wasn't until Kaepernick took a kneel. as things started to happen, and the media started drawing out some of these things, George Floyd, and over and over these incidents that were happening. Um, it just kind of came a point of conversation from a distance.
Mm.
It's kind of happening out there, right? And so I would say like those were really the only those were like the sparks to the conversation. Uh, but that's a whole other. I don't want to venture down all that, but I would say that's kind of part of it. Also, our organization crew has admitted that like a lot of our missionaries are white. Now we're slowly becoming more diverse, and so our organization is trying to help people of color basically raise their support by, they created something called an ethnic minority fund because they realized that, well, that's a whole nother topic, but it started generating conversation within our organization. And there's been some really awkward presentations about race, like really awkward ones where like the presenters were not connecting well with the white community. And, you know, um, there's been miscommunication, but they're trying to steer that ship to say, we want to be a really diverse organization. And so it generated conversations within our ministry with people that we work with. And so all that to say, it's been a journey of what, since probably about 20, what is it, 2015,
Okay.
really is kind of when these conversations kind of started, trickling in a little bit more. Sorry, it's a very long answer to your question. You're probably like, wow, you live in a hole in that. What town do you live in again?
I again at the seat at the table, the whole thing is that we're listening. I'm not judging. I want to
Yeah.
just truly have a conversation because this is how it starts. Like I got
Oh
to see
yeah.
you for the person that you are and the journey that you're on. And likewise,
Hmm.
I'm hoping that what I share adds to your understanding of who I am as a person, right?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's what it's about. And then also a safe space to do this. So
Oh yeah.
that's how it starts for me. Now, as it goes and what it turns into is yet to be determined, right? Because
Oh yeah.
I'm listening as you were talking about the initiatives, um, which are great, right? And there's so many different communities when you say people of color, and then there are even faux pas in that, like when you're talking about different communities, because so there are groups of communities that don't necessarily like when you say, okay, just people of color, and then you put like Black people in there because there is this tendency to use even the color of your skin and have that as a hierarchy
Yeah.
into how you then get into groups, how you participate, and then how you're even presented, because sometimes it's just like, hey, I got a Black person in my group now, like, and that's it. Like everything is solved. All the racial issues are good now because we went out and found
Yeah.
some Black people, and you can see them, right? You see them, they're with us. But it doesn't speak to true allyship where you would be willing to give up whatever privileges that you have and hold, um because I don't think we ever get there, because oftentimes it's just surface stuff. So
Hmm.
even in that, being willing to have those conversations, those, now you talk about uncomfortable conversations, those are going to eventually be a part of the dynamics if you
Hmm.
truly seek to really bring um an organization or people together in a way that works, right? Because I have to be
Yeah.
equally seen. You have to be equally seen. I have to be equally heard. You have to be equally heard. And sometimes the person who has been marginalized, you don't want to hear the stuff that they have to say, right?
Yeah. Well, I was told people of color could be offensive, and saying Black is offensive. So then this is where the fear starts. Well, what
Uh-huh.
the heck do I say? What do I say? I don't want to say the wrong thing. Our organization's like, no, you got to say people of color. That's the right way to do it. And then someone's like, no, 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 no. That was very offensive. So then you just say I'm a black person, not a big deal. I'm like, oh my gosh, okay. So now I'm just, what's your name? Like, I don't want to, like, or how do you classify a community? And I was like, oh my gosh. And then that's how the walls start building.
Mhm.
It's because I don't want to say the wrong thing.
Which is it's another dynamic within conversation. So we're walking into this very sensitive topic, and
Yeah.
you're feeling like there are what do you call those things in the field that blow up? You're the army person. The landmines.
Yeah. Landmines. Yep.
So you're kind of walking into this racial landmine, right? As a white person, especially. And this fear, I could say the wrong thing. You brought up something that I thought was really nice in one of our conversations to be so honest about. You were saying that, there's also the possibility of you saying these wrong things and then all of a sudden you're a racist, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I
Which is
mean,
one of the last things you want to be qualified as, because that's so opposite of what your mission really is. So there's gonna be some messiness, because this is a very messy thing, but I think that as we begin to build a relationship, because that's what happens when you come and you sit at the table. Communion used to be a meal at the table, right? And when you
oh yeah.
break bread with one another, there are all types of things that come out, right?
Hmm.
You have all types of conversations that lead to some type of nourishment and healing, not of just the body as you eat physically, but of the spirit and the soul, because you're taking in not only just the food, but there's conversations that are happening as well, right? When we go back to the communion, yeah, they were sitting the Last Supper, they were having communion, but they were eating food, and then very real instances came out around that table. Jesus is like, hey, yeah, we all eating and drinking and being merry, but I'm gonna start washing y'all's feet. I'm gonna drop a dime on y'all and let y'all know that one of y'all in here is gonna betray me. you
Right.
know,
Right.
so at the table, as we come to the table, it's not always about just eating and drinking and being merry. It's the place too where we pull up in our most authentic selves and we have the hard conversations,
Yeah.
and it gets messy, but sticking it out and everybody willing to be able to stay and sit with those hard things is also important. And over time, you know, things get done. So it's not going to all get done in a day, but you have to come in your truest form, show up. And then if you have a question about things like, okay, well, what do I call you? What's correct or whatever? Be okay with asking the question, right?
Hmm.
And then in asking the question, be okay in asking the question to the right person too. So I know that we have established this relationship where I've told you,
Right.
because I know we've had this conversation back and forth. You're like, I don't want to say the wrong thing. And I'm like, listen, this is not this is not that. I'm not trying to have a conversation with you to catch you up on something in a way to make you look bad. I just truly want to have a heart to heart conversation,
Yeah.
and let's get something started from there. So that's another dynamic of just knowing who you can ask these really vulnerable questions to. So you do have to have these safe spaces.
Yeah, you have to have trust somehow to be able to do that. And I think that's part of the problem, I think, with having these conversations that people sit there and they go, I don't know if I can trust you. Can you trust me?
Oh yeah, and I mean that's definitely there on from the, and I'll qualify myself. I say I'm black, right? So if you say that I'm black, that doesn't offend me. If you say that I'm African American, that doesn't offend me. Those are things that I identify as. If you're wondering, just ask, hey, how would you like to be identified as, or what would you like to be identified as? And then you can kind of go on from the conversation from there. But I'm not that much of a stickler about, like, if you call me something, as long as you're not calling me something offensive, I'm good.
Right, right.
So as a African American woman or a black woman, if you come into my space and you're showing that you have interest in a topic about race, but you're reluctant to engage in the conversation, yeah, my antennas immediately are going to go up and say, hey, can I trust this person? Because I'm also sharing things that are very vulnerable to me. And in some cases, things that I've been traumatized, there's trauma around, right? So, I've been called out of my name, all these different types of things, which if I'm going to be in a space where I'm going to talk about them and I'm trying to talk about race, I want to be able to trust the person that I'm having this conversation with, that it doesn't turn into that all over again, or it doesn't turn into a thing where it's like, yeah, sorry that happened to you, but I don't really understand it. So I get dismissed, right? So trust goes both ways, to have the
Yeah.
conversation and then for the conversation to also be received.
Yeah. It's good.
Yeah. So I thank you, and I really appreciate this conversation. I know we were joking around about having a podcast or something at some
Yeah.
point, but I really want to continue on conversations and kind of push the button, because I am under the practice that if we're going to fix this problem of race, and then especially race in Christianity, because I don't feel like it belongs there, but it is. Race persists as a problem within Christianity, that we have to have these types of conversations, right? And I can't just be having them by myself in my community, because it's not as effective. We know the things that we've experienced, and as we talk to each other, often it's just venting sessions. But we need people outside of the community who can stand in proxy to understand what the overarching system has done to us, and who come from that position of power, or represent those power dynamics, so that we can really have real conversations. So
Oh yeah, dude. And there was a I don't know. I probably told you this, but I remember there was like a racial roundtable or something like that. I was a part, like I was like witnessing in my organization and stuff, and they were having conversations, and the white guy at the table did not represent probably a majority of the issues that the white people had in the audience. He just sat there and said, "Yeah, like we're all losers and idiots, and we don't know what we're doing," and like gained nothing from the white community instead of asking some of the hard questions. And I think this might exist out there somewhere in podcasts, but I think it'd be fun to just have like a raw, like here's like some raw things that here are some things that white people are probably afraid to say and will never say it. And how do we get past those things? Like how do we talk about the raw discussion without just putting it out there? Because there's a lot of, let me tell you, there are a lot of racists out there, and they kind of hide behind these ridiculous, crazy arguments. But you got to take them out there and say, okay, well, let's put it out there. What do you think about that? I don't know. It'd be fun
oh yeah, I
just to
think it
kind of
would be,
smash down these walls, right? Come on.
yeah, I don't mind having the uncomfortable conversations, because
Yeah.
I ultimately, if you open up and you show that you're willing to have them, then you can have them. The majority of the people who stand on the principles that they stand on, they're not going to change unless they have this moment that I asked you about earlier, where there is a rupturing of their understanding concerning the matter. Like that something
Oh
has to
yeah.
happen that just kind of blows that up. And then from there, you go on your own personal journey and you have to do the work. Like, you also can't expect, because that's another issue that is often brought up, is that Black people, we did not create racism, right? We
Yeah.
were minding our own business, chilling, doing our own things. And often when we are met with very racist people, We're like
Hmm.
just trying to live and survive, right? Like I woke up that morning and I didn't wake up saying, "Hey, I want to run into this idiot who looks at me and is immediately triggered and that wants to just make my day like a horrible day." We don't wake up with those
Uh-huh.
types of ideals saying like that's what I want to do today. We wake up hoping to just go on about our lives. But our
Hmm.
existence is often captured and brought back to this place where when I go out in the public, there is the possibility of me running into somebody who, just because I showed up, I didn't do anything, I just showed up in the
Hmm.
skin that I'm in, and they have a problem with my existence in the space, sharing space with them. And it's like, really?
Hmm.
Really? Really? This is what we're doing today? So yeah, just getting into all those things I think is it's worth doing. And
Yeah.
yeah, let's have the hard conversations. um let's see, is there any question, comment, or hard thing that might be rolling around in your head now? Like, we got about 9 minutes left that you want to maybe kind of practice and throw out there and see. We're at the end of the conversation, so have people make it this far and they watch to the end.
Oh, did they hang on? Well, I think any of my questions would probably create another show. So, I mean, it would
Well, let's give them a cliffhanger. Let's do it.
give them a cliffhanger. Um, how do you go about making somebody care?
Mm,
I mean, there's so many people who just says, I don't care. Like, why do I need to care, right? If I just keep it private to myself and I just have my own opinions, I mean, there's a lot of people who say I don't really care to have these conversations. Like, it's not a big deal. Um, how do you like, how do race is such an important thing to you, but how do you approach somebody who just doesn't, okay, you know, they don't want to engage with you? Is that, are, is it something that, I mean, there's just so many arrogant people who just sort of are just like, it just takes a lot of humility, I think, to have these conversations, right? And it's like, there's just always going to be people who just don't care. So you just move on and just say, okay, well, we're just going to keep rolling. Or what's your strategy for helping people care and see the important storyline of race and your everyday life?
mm. That is a great question. um There is a saying, a serenity prayer that goes something like, God help me um, to change the things that I can, basically, and accept the things that I cannot change, right?
Hmm.
And then you find a peace with the things that you know that you can't change. I understand that I am a vessel that has been created. I'm passionate about this type of conversation, and I do believe that it's inspired by God. But I am not the one that changes hearts. God does that. So, in that, I feel like if a person crosses my path and there is an opportunity to sow a seed, whether that seed is rejected or whether it finds ground that it can grow on, I'm not the maker of that, right?
Right.
I am just here to put the message out. Now, what though people do with the message, I
Yeah.
only have so much energy in the day, and there are lots of other battles that I'm fighting. So
Yeah.
I don't try to make people care, but I do pray. Like, if there's something and there's a person that's vexing my spirit because of what they're doing, I may pray. If there's someone who's trying to harm me because they don't care, I'm going to take action to make sure that I protect myself. And sometimes
Hmm.
that's a wake up call. But ultimately, we are all on this journey. We're going to wake up
Yeah.
at different times. And there's some people that's not going to ever wake up. So I think when it comes to a matter of making people care, I just come from the standpoint that it's not my job to do that, to make people care. It's my job to present the message and to present it in such a way that it could be understood, it can be digested, it sees the humanity in all parts. And then from that, I've done my job.
Hmm.
So
Do
that's
you have a tendency to move towards people who, and it sounds like a really bizarre question. Is there a tendency to move towards people who, or actually, how often do you come across people who you sense that fear in them? You know how you're talking about if you have conversation, you can kind of sense if they're not really wanting to engage with you. How often does that happen? Or, is that like, 5 times a year? Is it once a month, 3 times a week that you have a conversation with somebody and you can just tense that, you can sense that they're like kind of recoiling.
so for Black people, we exist in this world in a duality, right?
Hmm.
So we're always in white spaces, and we have to live in white spaces, and we even learn to adapt and live in white spaces in a certain way, right? So I'm often in the background depending on where I am. I might be a part of a conversation that I don't necessarily want to be a part of a conversation, right?
Hmm.
um and I know that if I interject into someone else's conversation because I'm in this place with them, that it could turn the conversation completely in another direction and people aren't going to necessarily want to get into it. So I often try to use wisdom, right? Is it going to be fruitful to say anything?
Hmm.
Um, do I just kind of walk away and feel some type of way about the people that I'm around? Or am I like, oh, okay, I kind of know these people's true colors, so I'm going to just keep my guard up? So I kind of gauge it from that because I don't go around trying to make people
Right.
see that they specifically need to change. Again, I'm going to give out some information. If you want it, great. If you don't, that's also great. But there are times where I'm placed in situations and my heart compels me to say something. And in
Yeah.
those times when my heart compels me to say something, then I ask God for the words to say, and then we go from there. Other times I'm literally drawn into things because a person might attack me in a
Yeah.
particular way. And if they attack me in a particular way, I'm forced to respond, right? Because I'm going to protect myself first in that regard. And then after that, if there is a opportunity to help the person who attacked me understand that, hey, this not cool. And
Hmm.
you need to grow up, or you need to like realize that you're harming people, then I will. Um, to that, I'll say I remember I was working at this particular organization, and they prided themselves on being an organization that like reflected the new and progressive America, right?
Hmm.
So race wasn't a thing, but in the composition of the organization, it's like, y'all got Black people here working for y'all, but there's some things that we might want to talk to y'all about. I don't know if you want to
Right.
listen, but the progressiveness that you are running around claiming, it needs to be worked on.
Yeah.
So, with that being said, there came a time in this organization where I actually got called a racial slur.
Yeah.
And I was sitting amongst some colleagues, and they were just, my colleagues were talking about, people just kind of need to get over certain things and da 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 da. And so the conversation just kept rubbing me the wrong way, because I was like, sheesh, like, I wish I could get over this. I really wish I could get over the fact that when I show up to certain spaces, there are people that might be there that are just adamant about putting me in my place, right? And I have no control over that. So they were having this conversation about just getting over things and how people are just so sensitive nowadays, and a lot of things that you hear. And I was like, do I let them just cook today? And let them feel like they're having this great conversation, or do I interject? So I chose that day to interject. I said, okay, you know what? Let me share with them my personal experience. So I told them how, even though they thought their organization was very progressive, what happened to me as a Black person in their organization. And it was gasp. Oh, no way. Someone called you that? I was like, yeah. And I was like, who? How? I can't believe this. So, there was this whole conversation that went back and forth. And then I explained to them what it's like to be in my world and how I wish I could get over some things. But personally, I can't take off my skin. I can't, I want to show up as just a person, but that's just not where we're at in this world. And sharing those things in that regard, and just from a very personal space, when I felt like it was the right time to do, because that conversation kind of led itself, and I had a relationship with these people in a way that I could do it, it was fruitful to me. If it was just the people that I just saw having a conversation off the street, they didn't know me from anybody else, that conversation probably would have went a totally different way. Because I know one of the ladies after that, it was like something just woke up in her, and she was like, I can say that I've never had an experience like that ever. And like, she had a whole different take on her understanding, and she was more informed. So I think that's a part of it as well. Like, I'm not going to make people care, but if I can share a part of my personal journey or story with someone who's interested, that's a start.
Well, that's awesome. Well, I have so much. Oh man, we could go all day about this, because I have, even like every time we talk, I just got more questions, but we don't have time.
Yeah, well, we can make time, and then if we're gonna put this one out, and we'll see how it goes, and if you want to continue on and have these conversations, let's continue to pull up a seat at the table and ask these conversations. I want to thank you for coming out and spending this time today. I want to thank you also for just being open and honest. We're past the hard stuff now. I'm glad you're ready to ask questions, because that's when it gets really, really good, but it takes it. So I want to thank all my viewers who took the time to share this conversation with us today. And remember, you are responsible for making sure that your legacy and knowledge is preserved. So remember, everyone, I want you to go out, when you see one, teach one. So something that you learned today, hopefully you can share it with someone else, so that their lives can be changed and impacted in a positive way. All right. Well, until next time, Nate.
Thanks for having me on. You're awesome. Look forward to it.
All right. Thank you.
Yep. See ya.
All right. See ya.